All right, everybody, we are officially getting going here. Thank you for joining today's Customer Champions Community Roundtable. For those of you that aren't familiar with this new logo
Okay,
here,
boys. Okay, King Nico, it's okay.
I just want to tee up that we just started a new community. It's called Databook Connect. A little bit more on that shortly. There's a bunch of you guys and women who have joined the Strategic Sales Network before. This has transitioned. So this is our first event. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that community shortly, but thank you for joining. I'll keep this intro rolling. We've got an awesome guest today. Work closely with him. David Grasswick is here. We're going to be talking champion building. And we're going to have a Q&A. Dave will open up with some thoughts, but really this is all about you guys as well. So bring your questions, bring those scenarios, anything specific that you guys have on your mind, ask Dave. That's what he's here for. If everybody could turn on their cameras, that'd be amazing. We do encourage sound up, so don't feel like you have to be shy. The whole point here is to be interactive with Dave and each other. So think of a topic or a question if you haven't already. We've already gotten some in our community forum. Everything from like what makes a champion worthy of being one? What's the difference between a champion and a coach? How do you develop that ongoing relationship? How do you get them to publicly endorse products if they're hesitant? So we've collected questions already. Let's get some new ones, all about having a conversation. If everybody wouldn't mind too, you can just add your name, company, and again, if you have that question or a conversation starter, just put it in the chat. So this is all hosted by Databook Connect, which is all affiliated with Databook. We'd love for you guys to join if you haven't already. It's brand new. It just relaunched with a whole new fresh coat of paint. I'm looking at you, Sarah. Sarah Close is our head of content and creative. It looks fantastic. As Greg was saying at the top from Anaplan, he loves what he sees so far, and we hope that everybody else does. You're going to find user tip content. We want to get customer voices in there. That's the whole point. Have everybody share what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what success they're seeing. We're going to put resources in there. We're going to have more of these events. If you guys like gift cards, if you guys like Nespresso machines, we're giving one away this month. So you guys can go win that kind of stuff. We think that's a fun little perk to throw in there. And everybody who's in there, very cool, very supportive. We have another roundtable, our second with Databook Connect coming up. You'll get a glimpse into the technology roadmap. It'll be an exclusive sneak peek. And Ivan, our brand new CTO, will be the guest speaker there. So you can ask him anything, react. The whole point is get conversational. Speaking of roundtables, we've got a bunch of recordings in there, all on demand. Everybody from John Barrows to Scott Leese to Jacqueline Cartella. And we're going to be adding more. Also, we want to hear from everybody here. What events do you want to see participate in? We have a challenge in there that allows you to pitch your best idea. So let us know, and we will try to make it happen for you. That URL, community.databook.com, couldn't be any easier. We'll also be having exclusive content from this particular recording today. So be sure to check that out. We'll tee that up later. Now, I am going to hand it off to Dave Grasswick, VP of Global Sales over at Databook. He's a wonderful guy. He's got great wisdom. Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and really just dive right into the topic.
Well, Matt, thanks for the great introduction. Appreciate it. You're too kind with some of your words. But maybe for the audience, a little background for some of the folks that I don't know. First, thanks for joining. I've been in the enterprise software space for about 22 years in IC roles, management roles, leadership roles, so many learnings along the way. I will tell you in my early years, it was less about knowledge for me and it was more about hustle. I was in my 20s and it was just, I'm going to outwork people. I'll just make more calls. I'll just get more meetings and that's how I'll win. And that was wildly successful for me for a while. Then you get to a point, right, where you start to do more strategic types of opportunities and you realize there's a lot more to it than just that. That's a component of it. And you've got to have that hustle and grit and that learning mindset. But then it's you've got to have people inside the walls of these companies that are willing to fight for you and they're willing to work for you on your behalf when you're not there. And I went through a stretch where I thought I had champions, and you realize you get to the end of a quarter, you get to the end of a year, and a deal doesn't happen, right? And it's pushed or it disappears altogether. And you're like, oh man, what the hell happened? But you know what? You look in the mirror and say, you got to be honest with yourself. I didn't have a champion. I had a coach, and coaches are awesome. But you know what? They don't understand the entire lay of the land within organizations. And a deal doesn't happen, and you ask them what happened, and they don't know. And that's where kind of the light bulb went on for me. It was a great learning opportunity for me when you kind of have that happen a couple times. You're like, okay, I've got to figure out, what's going on here. And I started to create what I called the champions building checklist, and the things that I kind of need to understand and learn in order to determine if they're truly a champion. And one of the things that I learned in that process was you've got to ask hard questions, and you've got to ask hard questions early and often. And in my experience, the best sellers, that's what they do. And I would say earlier in my career, I don't know if I'd say I'm afraid to do it, right? But there's a lot of people I see that they're afraid to ask a hard question because they're afraid of the answer they might hear. But the reality is you want to hear that answer so that you can go spend your time on the people that actually can move your deal forward, or go spend your time on a different account that has a better chance of converting. And once I started asking those questions, and I'll go through, and I shared the checklist on the community already, it was like eye-opening for me. It was like an epiphany moment where I was like, oh my gosh, now I am so laser focused on the stuff that has the highest chance to convert, and I'm not going to waste my time on stuff that doesn't, because I'd rather have a no than a maybe any day, because the maybes you'll spend a ton of time and they'll never convert. And those all come from the fact of developing good champions and testing champions throughout the process. And to kind of peel the onion back from that, it starts with establishing credibility and rapport. And you have to kind of give with a lot of these folks before you get. And I think the other thing that I had to kind of shift my mind on is I had to tell myself, it's not about me. It's not about our solutions. It's not about selling them anything. It's about trying to understand, can I help them? Can I truly, genuinely help them? And can I truly understand what they are trying to solve? And in order to get to that, you have to show up audible ready. I think John Kaplan has said that numerous times, right? You have to come in with a point of view. High level, how are they performing financially against their peer group? Where are they overperforming? Where are they underperforming? How does that align to what the management team is strategically talking about within an organization? Who are the stakeholders at the highest level that actually have the most vested interest because they're compensated and bonused on actually improving those areas of weakness? And then how does that align to the solutions that you're selling? And you have to come in to that first meeting, or even earn the right to get that first meeting by having that point of view or that hypothesis. That's what's going to allow you to earn the right to start to ask those differentiated types of questions and those qualifying questions to get you into the champion building exercise. So you go and execute that piece of the meeting. And at the end of that meeting, the whole idea is you kind of want to come to this conclusion. Does it make sense to continue talking or not? And the answer might be no. But if the answer is yes, let's understand, what has to happen. Who else needs to be involved? And this is where you start to get an idea of, okay, how do I start to figure out who my champions are? And part of this is you also need to go in with a pretty detailed relationship map around where you think the key stakeholders are, who the players are. Because in these big organizations, a lot of times the people you're talking to, they may not necessarily know. But if you drop some names, They'll be like, oh, you know what? You're exactly right. Vanessa should be included in this and actually have a great relationship with her. I will coordinate a meeting. So part of champion building, in my experience, is from the very first meeting and every meeting going forward, you need to ask them for stuff. And if they can deliver on that consistently, they're starting to show champion type behavior. And at the beginning, it might just be little things. Could just be introducing you to another stakeholder. Could be introducing you to a peer. Could be just coordinating another meeting and adding some people on there. It could be, hey, this is really interesting. And you ask, how does something like this get done? I'm not sure, but I'm going to go find out. And they come back in the next meeting and they do find out and they bring you that information. So to kind of give you a real world example from probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was working with a top 15 financial services organization, working with a VP in the marketing department, and very interested in a lot of the stuff that we were doing. And one of their key areas for growth was how do we go and expand the number of customers that we have in our high growth markets. And their high growth markets were in the south of the US. And so we came in with a point of view around how we would do that. And then I started asking this stakeholder, how does something like this get done? And they said, well, this would have to go in front of the CMO. But in order to get in front of the CMO, I kind of would have to get my boss involved. Because if I don't get my boss involved, that's not going to go well. So we should schedule a meeting with my boss first. Then once we get her involved and on board, then we've got to go to our CMO's right-hand person that they hired and brought in to basically manage all of this. And when we get that person bought in, then we'll go to the CMO jointly and we'll jointly present this to the CMO to get their buy-in. Once we get their buy-in, here's the approval process that we need to go through. Legal approval, procurement approval, security approval, business stakeholder approval, etc. I give you all that because these are all the types of things that we need to find out in our deals, right? Now, that didn't all happen on one meeting. That happens over a course of meetings. And that happens once you establish credibility, trust, and rapport. And you do that by delivering on the promises that you make to them. And at the beginning, it may start as little promises, right? It might be, hey, I'll share the materials with you after this within 24 hours. Well, if you say you're going to deliver it in 24 hours, deliver it in 24 hours. If you say you're going to follow up in 3 days, follow up in 3 days, not 5 days, right? Because it's these little nuggets that you start to establish that trust and credibility because the person on the other side says, okay, that person said they were going to do this and they did. And then it's got to be always about them. I'll kind of pause on that and say, the other thing I learned is it's never about us. It's all about, I'm naturally curious about why they're trying to solve a problem, why they're trying to do anything, all in the guise of why does that matter on your side? Because at the end of the day, people love to buy stuff, but they don't like to be sold to. And if you fully and completely immerse yourself in aligning to the things that they care about and the overarching challenges of that business and truly trying to solve that, and if you can't, opting out, they will feel that. When they feel that, you'll never have to sell anything, right? They'll want to buy. And that's when it becomes really fun. So I'll pause there and just that's a little bit of background about myself.
Thanks for that, Dave. Greg, you already had a question, and I'd love to just throw it to you to ask that. It's your floor now.
Sure. I feel like I'm always the first. Lead off batting, number 13, Greg Nishihira. Hey, Dave, as Matt knows, and a few of the other participants know that, champion building is super near and dear to my heart. And I don't think, I don't want to say you can't, but it's very challenging to win a deal without having a champion. Now, my question is specifically post-COVID. back in the day, when we were going on site and having meetings, it was a little bit easier to identify who the champion is, right? Or at least identify a potential champion. In a virtual world, it's a little bit more challenging, right? And it's even more challenging, I think, I don't know, challenging is the right word, or it takes longer to build a champion than it had been prior to COVID. So I was just kind of curious if, everything that you talked about resonates with me 100%, but I was just curious on, at least the upfront, how are you identifying the champion, earlier on, if that's even possible, and how are you accelerating at least, qualifying the champion, more so than, how it just seems like it takes forever, these days.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, I think you're spot on, right? People, at our prospect companies and clients, they don't walk around with like a bandana on that says champion or potential champion, right? It's harder, in the post-COVID world, in my experience. That's why the deep questioning and qualification is imperative, right? Every meeting is an opportunity to ask them for something else.
Mm-hmm.
If they want something, you get something in return, and it can be little things like getting other people involved. How does something get done, right? Because champions are at all different levels. If you've been doing this long enough, I've had champions that are at, take it for a data book example, somebody that's in a sales role, but they've been a top producer for 10 years in their organization, and they're well respected all the way up to the founders. And so you wouldn't look at them on an org chart and say they're a champion. But then when you start to have conversations, they're like, oh yeah, this is how stuff gets done here. And this is who you need to go to. And these are the people that can make stuff happen. It's, you have to go meet a lot more people. And that's why I think it comes back to, I mentioned the relationship map. It's wildly important to have a good visual around all the players. And it's like putting a puzzle together, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing these large, complex enterprise deals. You got to find the corners first. You got to get those meetings, and you got to execute those meetings. And executing those meetings, part of that is closing for action items in the last couple minutes. And those action items are the things that are going to lead you to start to understand, could this person be a champion? If they're not a champion, can they take me to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have another conversation, and maybe that person's a champion. If that person's not a champion, let's go to some, have them take you to somebody else. And we have to keep widening our base, right? So find the corners in that puzzle, then start to find the ends, then start to fill in the middle. And all of that comes by just continuously and maniacally testing and asking good qualifying questions over and over again. And the other thing I learned with champions is, especially in the COVID world, and especially with the amount of turnover in all these companies, is you've got to ask the same question over and over again to the same stakeholder and to multiple stakeholders or potential champions to see if you get the same answer. And if you get the same answer, you can feel comfortable with it. And if you don't, you've got to keep digging. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, there's actually a couple things that I pulled out from it just to, call it out. Number one, you raise the point of, I've been telling AEs inside my company, outside my company, it's really about building an army of champions. It's the race is the more champions you have compared to your competition, the higher the probability you're going to win. It's just as simple as that, right? Now, getting there is the challenge and building that up to your point. But I think that what you raised for me is the difference. When we were in person, we can identify potential champions just by the way they act in a meeting, right? How they're conducting themselves in a way, right? I mean, oversimplified, of course. But I think the point that you raised on action items, asking questions, it's easier to ask more questions post-COVID, via email than what we were doing in the past, right? In the past, we might go call or, in-person meeting. It might be a week or two where, you can fire off emails and questions all day long to a variety of different people. So that might help in terms of scaling building the army, if you will. So not probably where you were thinking, but it kind of got me thinking about around those lines of, it could be, you could scale it probably a little bit better nowadays.
Yeah, and maybe piggybacking off of what you just said and the Zoom world that we live in, when you think about when we had much more FaceTime with customers and prospects, right? You would end the meeting, you'd have the hallway time, you'd have
Right.
the elevator time, and sometimes those were the most valuable 5 or 10 minutes that you could get. And
Hmm.
now the Zoom meeting ends and you click leave and everybody moves to their next one. So it is imperative to make sure you save 3 minutes at the end of that meeting so that the people you're talking to, you don't get to the end and like, oh, I got to go, I'm late for another meeting, and you got nothing out of it, right? And then you spend a month trying to get that rescheduled.
Yeah.
It's tougher, right? You have to be much more diligent with just meeting hygiene.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. No, thanks for answering the question.
You
It's
bet.
good stuff.
Brandon, you're up.
Yeah, hey Dave.
Brandon,
Kind
how
of
you doing, bud?
piggybacking off the thread that was just being talked about. Curious your kind of maybe philosophy on um, the nature of the champion role, right? And how much of it is evolutionary? How have you experienced that the strength of the champion ebbs and flows, maybe depending on how well you follow through, how well uh, deliver what you committed to, right? All the things that you talked about early on versus you thought you had a champion, but they were never really a champion. Maybe they were, and you did something that kind of messed up that trust, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you've experienced that and just the nature of it's a little bit of a moving uh, maybe a moving title, right? And how we as sellers, can maximize or optimize the strength of our champions and maybe minimize the situations where we lose them, even if for a brief period of time.
Yeah, Brandon, it's a great call out. And I think you're seeing it more and more now, right? In the current climate of how a lot of these companies are functioning and job security with a lot of folks. I think the big thing with champions is aligning, and the hardest thing is trying to find a personal win, right? But what's in it for them, right? Are they, if you're aligning to a high impact problem at a company, are they in it because you know what, they're going to align to senior stakeholders and this is going to put them in a great light and I have a chance to get promoted or whatever it may be. And if you find that personal win, you tend to get a little more stickiness. But I've also seen now there's this fear of messing up. And so as it relates to what you're talking about, I think you start to see even champions, if they're not strong enough champions, maybe they're strong coaches. Instead, they get cold feet, right? And so what I've seen work, and it's actually comes from the Jolt Effect book, is kind of and this comes back to the relationship map again, right? You've got to get more of these people in the boat so they don't feel like they're the only ones bringing this up the food chain. They're spreading some of that risk across other stakeholders that are also getting bought into that. And what you'll find in that process is you might end up finding out that there's a stronger champion, right? If you go through those exercises, you might actually find that somebody else has greater access to some of those key stakeholders, has a higher vested interest, and you bring them all along for the ride. And I think that's become more important in the last couple of years than I had seen in the past, where you'd line up to a nice, strong champion that'd take you to that senior stakeholder and you could go get something done. I'm seeing you've got to kind of get a cohort of people now. I don't know if others in the group here have experienced that, but we're seeing a lot more of that.
Speaking of, that kind of topic as well, does anybody have like a specific scenario that they're experiencing right now that they'd like to throw out there for advice? Or I have a bunch of preceded questions I can go to, but I just want to make sure, all you folks have a chance to Throw something out there that you're going through that anybody in this group can help with. If not, we can go to this next question. So Dave, this was from Steve Lazinski. How do you convert hesitant champions to publicly endorsed products, especially when they fear that their competition might be watching their every move publicly? Any advice there?
Well, so hesitant champions, Steve, if you're on, can you go into that, elaborate on that a little more?
Unfortunately, Steve is not on this particular call. This is from the forum.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I would say if you have hesitant champions, you haven't qualified them well enough, right? They may not be a champion. They might be a coach. Or you haven't aligned closely enough to things that they care most about that help them with their day-to-day, or aligned or found a personal win. Or again, to the point that I was bringing up with Brandon's comment, if there's a bunch of layoffs that happen at companies, people that might have been champions now become hesitant champions, right? It's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I should stick my neck out there now, right? I don't need to get it chopped off.
Tim, you just raised your hand. I want to make sure we go to you.
Yeah, just to follow on to your point, David, in many ways in the software sales space, do you find that the end users can be the most effective champions because they can validate the pain points, and also where your solution can solve those pain points? Does it carry the most weight, do you think, sometimes coming from an end user, assuming they have a lot of the other things, access to the people that you need them to influence on those elements?
I think it can be powerful. I think the challenge with a lot of those particular personas is they don't have a lot of the other things that you need.
Yeah.
Most of them typically don't have access to the economic buyer. Most of them don't know how to get something done. They don't know who approves budget, how much budget's available. Are there thresholds that you have to stay under for certain approvals? Those types of things that, quite frankly, when you get to the last month of a quarter, it's why deals push, right? Is because it's like, I was trying to get this deal done and it was $300K and the threshold for the approval was $250, and anything over that needed to go to the CFO. Well, that might have been good to know 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, right? And so I think that's why it's wildly important to test anybody you're talking to and just be naturally curious around just, can they get you to the people? Do they know who the people are? Do they know how something gets done? If they can walk you through those things, then I think you can feel pretty good about it, regardless of what level they're at.
Makes sense. Could I ask a follow-on question? Because I'm a big believer in relationship maps. We implemented them in our account planning process and everything. How important are cross-functional people who may be, so we'll use, you mentioned Databook earlier. So like if sales enablement is a critical cross-function, right, related, it's not just the sales org that's going to be looking at it, but there's other role. How important are identifying key cross-functional influencers, champions, coaches, et cetera, within your relationship map? Is that also something that you focus on?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're thinking you want to do a large strategic transformational deal, you have to help connect the dots for your champions, right? You have to go and do that for them. Make it really easy for them when we talk about give. These big companies, right? What you'll learn is a lot of these different departments, they never talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can just find a way to bring them into the same room together, you'll be amazed at the conversations you'll have, right? Because people will be like, oh, I'm doing this. And they'll be like, I'm doing the same thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're spending money on this in 2 different places. And you might find out you don't even need to go find more budget, right? Because you can sunset other things and actually fund your project from that. But you have to help your champion do that, right? Because they have normal day jobs too. Most of these people, their day job isn't evaluating technology, right? But they're trying to help because they feel there's value in this. But then how do you go find the other players and drop them on their doorstep and say, hey, here's other people that are really interested in doing this too. And they've got different initiatives, but there's different ways that they could fund this as well to help deliver on what you're trying to do. Or maybe you tie that together to a higher arching, high impact problem that the leadership team is working on. But yeah, in my experience, that's one of the secret sauces, I think, as a seller is it's the importance of the relationship map, because you've got to help them go across aisle and find those other players.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And sometimes the people you're talking to don't realize that the other people are influenced by the decision that they make or have additional benefits that will come from the implementation. In the data center space, the colo guys, the real savings came for the network team, but they weren't usually involved in the data center conversation as an example. So you had to make sure that you brought them both together into the conversation so the ROI was applied across the critical elements involved in the decision-making process. So thanks for that clarification.
And Greg, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, you brought up a couple of ideas here, and I'll start off with when I was managing teams, each one of my teams had like a persona that they would have. And this particular team, they called themselves the bomb squad. And their whole idea is to actually find all the bombs, the booby traps that, early on, rather than stepping into them, later on in the sales cycle. So to your point around, the user community and things of that nature, I feel like sales anymore are covering every opportunity like it's a precious gem and wanting to so bad qualify in every opportunity rather than try and qualify out, which means, you end up spinning in mud on, bad opportunities. And so I think to the point about the end users, if I was sending an end user technology, and part of what we do certainly is that I want to get them involved early and get their feedback early. And if there's negative feedback, I know how I need to course correct, or I need to, make a decision if we're just not a fit for them, right? So there's that. The other part around cross-functional, I mean, it really is what I mentioned before, building an army of champions. But, to Dave's point on having that, org chart, relationship map, whatever you want to call it, you want to have that thing lit up green, meaning in favor for you, and you want to identify all the reds and yellows and have a game plan around each one of those to flip them to green. So to Dave's point on having that map, the broader and deeper that map is, and the more green you have on it, it's an early indication of how successful you're going to be in that campaign.
Yeah, Greg, great call out. And to your first comment there around the kind of the qualification, I'd make the argument that, that's kind of a symptom of not enough pipeline, right? And when you don't have enough pipeline, you hold on to these opportunities, right? And you don't want to ask the hard question because you know what, oh my gosh, that's the only opportunity I have for the quarter. And, I think somebody said this, it might have been Jamal Reimers, you got to kind of slow down to speed up.
Mm-hmm.
I think we went through a stretch where I want to say as an industry, we might have lost our way, and it was just all activity for activity's sake.
Yeah.
How many calls are you making? How many emails are you sending? How many meetings are you getting? And it's about the quality of the meetings, and you got to kind of slow down and do the right amount of research to come in educated with a point of view on where you think you can help and why. And if you do that, you'll start to see that you actually probably need less meetings or more of the right meetings. You'll get more of the right meetings because of your credibility, but you'll be executing better. And if you do that, your deal sizes will get bigger, and then you'll need less opportunities. But I think activity for activity's sake is not the answer.
Totally agree. I always tell people, sysadmins will talk to anybody because nobody wants to talk to them. And when you reach out to them, they're like, oh, yes, let's talk. Yeah, you'll get your numbers up, but it results in zero.
Will, I want to make sure we get your question in.
Yeah, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to piggyback on what Nishi had mentioned about the bomb squad. I wish I had a bomb squad when I was at Oracle. I was working on an opportunity, had all the right champions, had all the right individuals, created the map and everything, and didn't realize there was an architect, low level, off my radar, that was best friends with the CTO, who I was having all these conversations with. And champion I didn't bother to ask the champion, but yeah, out of nowhere, the architect was, I was selling OCI at the time, Oracle Compute Infrastructure, and we were competing against Amazon. And the architect had a relationship at Amazon, and I lost the deal because I didn't realize there was somebody there that had a bomb and blew my deal off the table. But I think it's a valid point that champions are able to do that and help you identify, who can put the kibosh on your deal and who it is you need to talk to. By the way, great seeing Brandon Meek, one of my champions at PwC. And Nishi, always good seeing you as well.
Likewise, brother.
Thanks for that input, Will. One question I wanted to make sure we asked came through. Let's go to Herschel. Sorry, you got the floor, man.
Thank you. Yeah, Will's name looked familiar, so thank you for validating that. Now, we have spoken a lot about champions. Now, is there a time at all that you would also want maybe coaches? And when is the right time to have them? Not just the internal coaches, but someone external.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should have as many coaches as you want. They're wildly valuable, right? When you're starting to put together a narrative and a point of view and a story, maybe even a proposal. The only difference between the coaches and champions is the coaches don't have access to power, right? They don't have access to budget, and the champions do, right? But you want as many coaches as you can get, right? Because, I mean, I can't speak for other people's proposals, but as you're putting stuff together, if you're running a proof of value or something like that, all those coaches and those folks that love what you're doing, incorporate that into your proposals and leverage that for your meeting with the economic buyer. You've got to get that meeting with the economic buyer, right? And the coach probably isn't going to get you there because they're a coach. If they could get you there, they're probably a champion. And so I would say you want to develop as many coaches as you can, because that will create stickiness in the relationship. But to get things done, you're going to need champions, and sometimes multiple champions, depending on the size of the opportunity.
Thanks.
And actually, Greg, going back to kind of your initial thing around, the post-COVID Zoom world, I will say, one of the other things, and I'd be curious with the group here, get on a texting relationship with your folks. I mean, that is a telltale sign, right? When you start establishing credibility, if you can text these people and they're giving you responses and answers back at all hours of the night, and they're jumping on with you at 9 o'clock their time, those are great indicators, right?
100%.
Dave, one question I wanted to make sure we got in was around this idea of internal pressure to get as much out of a champion as possible. So you got an AE who's reporting up and trying to move things fast, but they also want to continue that rapport. Maybe they're not quite on that texting relationship yet where they can get kind of more instantaneous answers. But how do you, as a sales leader in particular, recommend an AE balances that, where they don't want to put too much pressure, but they also want to make sure that their boss is happy and not ruining that relationship by going too fast? Any advice there from your experience?
I think it comes down to asking hard questions, right? You can't be afraid to ask the hard questions. And I don't know if anybody read the book, Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. But he kind of talks about, ask hard questions in a soft tone. I think he called it late night DJ voice. But, you got to get to that point, right? And the other thing he talks about is you have to make no okay. If you make no okay, they'll let their guard down because they're like, oh, okay, they're not going to pressure me for like an answer and like I have to get this done. It's like, hey, I just want the honest answer, right? I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear because I need to get a deal done at the end of July. Like, if it's August, it's August. And I'm just hoping you can walk me through and explain to me why it's August, what has to happen for it to be August, and what steps we have to cover. And let's shoot for that if that's the case. Because in my experience, like jamming deals, that's usually not going to end well. But if you have a champion, right, you can get creative and they will typically try to run through a wall for you. But again, sometimes there's barriers on their side too. But you got to get out in front of that. And part of that is just, I would suggest take a look at that champions building checklist and just continue to just ask those questions throughout the entire sales process to the same people. Like, just because they gave you an answer a month ago doesn't mean that's the correct answer now, right? There might be a new stakeholder in there that needs to get introduced. They might have gone through layoffs. There might be a million things that happened inside those walls. We have to maniacally continue to test our champions.
Hey, Dave, I just wanted to call out something that another thought you triggered is, it's okay to say no on both sides,
Yeah.
right? As a seller and as a prospect or a customer, right? Because I think where I see some fundamental flaws is that, AEs feel like they always have to say yes to everything. And yes, we will do that, versus telling the customer, no, you are going down the wrong path, right there. You will get more respect and trust from a champion, and even an EB if you make that stance, if you will.
It's a great call out, Greg. And it goes back to Brandon, what you were talking about. Be honest. Like, you know what? We can't solve world hunger, right? Here's the things. Like, and if they ask you if they're, okay, can you guys, you know what? That's actually kind of out of the stuff that we do. There's other players that do that. When you want to talk about establishing trust and credibility, to your point, Greg and Brandon, to your point, the fastest way to lose that is when you go say yes to stuff like that and they find out a month or 2 months later that that's a no. And who knows what conversations they've been having internally. And maybe you burned them now.
Yep.
Want to make sure we open it up. Any other questions from the floor? Feel free to just jump off of mute, ask your question, throw in a thought.
Hey, Dave, what was the last book you mentioned? Never Split the Difference. Who was the author?
Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator. He's awesome.
Oh, that's
He's
good.
got a master class too, I believe.
Does have a master class. Yeah, if you have a master class on the app, he's got great stuff in there. Listen to it while you're walking the dog.
By the way, just for the rest of the group here, Grasswick always has these phenomenal books that he recommends and podcasts. Well, one of the books that he recommended a while ago for me is What Great Salespeople Do. And it talks about the whole emotional, it's Michael Bosworth. So that's another great book recommendation.
Hit up your local Barnes and Noble after this call. Who was mentioning something?
Sorry, David, one of the things that we had when we had these large account teams for enterprises was looking at the relationship map, seeing if there was someone on the account team that sometimes is better suited to pursuing a champion. For example, a solutions architect talking with a technical person. Is that something you've also had success with? Because it brings the whole team into the piece, in the conversation and the strategy, I think. And sometimes you need they're more likely to talk to a technical solutions architect than a salesperson, right?
Yeah, I think if you're working large strategic opportunities and big companies, you should leverage your entire extended team, your leadership team, your sales engineers, solutions consultants, value folks, because you know what? Everybody needs to build relationships across that opportunity. If you're going to go get a 7-8 figure deal, you're going to need multiple stakeholders. And, if there's other folks within your organization that mesh better with certain personas, or because of maybe they have more technical chops than you as a seller, you should certainly leverage that. Completely agree.
Hey, the other thing going on champion building, to your point, Dave, is I task everybody. We call Village. It's basically a team. Everybody's tasked with at least building one champion,
Yeah.
right? Identify one, build one. Here are the criteria and all that. That helps accelerate the ability to have that army that we're just talking about.
Couldn't agree more.
Nearing the end of our session today, so I want to open it up. I have a closing question I can throw out there if we're ready, but anybody take the ball, run with it. Who's got a final question, thought, observation for Dave? If not, I can throw to our final question. All right. Here we go. So Dave, I'm going to read this question verbatim. What trends do you see in the future regarding the role of customer champions in enterprise sales? And how are you preparing your sales team to effectively cultivate and leverage customer champions moving forward into the next era?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trends is one champion's not enough, right? This fear of messing up is real. It used to be, fear of missing out, right? You wanted to create FOMO. Now it's, you know what, I don't want to mess up. And you've got to get wider, and you've got to make people more comfortable that they're not alone in running that up the mountain, right? There's other people that are going to go up the mountain with you. And that's something that, I mean, since COVID, I've seen it more and more. I don't know if the other folks on this Zoom have experienced that as well, but it's I think that's a trend that's probably here to stay.
And actually, this is the real last question. If there's one thing people should do differently, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I will hammer on meeting hygiene in the post-COVID world. Like, it's, in my experience, that is the biggest thing that will elongate your sales cycles. Is you've got to close for action items in every single meeting. You have to know what you want to get out of that. And you might want to get 3 things out of that. And depending on how the meeting goes, you're going to make the one ask, right? But you have to really manage that meeting with a tight agenda. And you have to close, and you have to let them know at the beginning that, assuming this goes well and it makes sense to continue talking, like, let's understand what should happen next, who we need to meet with. For me, that's table stakes, because if you don't, it's good, and you have to schedule the next meeting before you get off of your meeting, because they will disappear. You won't be able to get them again, and you'll just lose all your momentum. So for me, meeting hygiene is wildly important, and the action items at the end of that.
Great takeaway. Herschel, why don't you just bring us home? I see your hand raised. Want to make sure you're
Thank you. Now that we have spoken about champions in general, now based on your experience, are there any differences in champions or characteristics based on the industries or countries in which they are based in, like, say, US and Canada versus financial services and healthcare services and other industry verticals, right? Now, are there any nuances?
I would say let's maybe tackle the geography based first. I think depending on where you're at in the world, the risk tolerance for some of the folks tend to be different in my experience. Some people are more willing to put themselves out there, some are not, which makes it even more important to kind of create that relationship map and get wider and bring more of those folks to help run up the mountain with them. As it relates to specific industries, and have I seen characteristics with champions different? I can't say that I have enough expertise or enough data points, I should say, to be able to say intelligently that yes, there's distinct differences between champions in financial services and champions in manufacturing. I don't have enough data points for that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, and especially thank you, Dave. I just plugged the community one more time because we're going to be putting this recording in there. As I said at the top too, we already have a bunch of other recordings from great sessions around territory planning, business acumen with AI. As Sarah just pointed out here too, we're going to be going through the technology roadmap of DataBook very soon with our new CTO, Ivan. So that'll be a great one. But Dave, thank you. Loved all the advice and I loved all the conversation. Like this is the best part of these community gatherings. So people can meet each other, network, but also just share wisdom, advice, and really, collaboration over competition. Always top of mind for myself. So we'd love to see you in DataBook Connect for the next event. And until then, hope everybody has a great day, great rest of your week. Thank you again, Dave. Thank you everybody for attending. Great to meet some new folks along the way too. Thanks.